All right, welcome everyone. Today we're going to go over a React review. This is going to be a two-parter. Today we're going to concentrate on creating the Rick and Morty project that we've been working on for the previous night's assignments. We're going to add a feature onto it, and then we're also going to on the second part add a test suite, and we're going to create a test suite that satisfies all of our requirements. So now let's take a look here. I'm going to create a project. Again, this is a review. If you want to code along, I will be going slow enough to where you can code along. And if you guys want me to slow down at any point, you can let me know that you need me to slow down. If you have any questions, interrupt me, ask your question. The purpose of this is to make sure that we all have the fundamentals down, not just for everyone to sit there and watch me code as in previous lectures. So let's go ahead and get this started. Actually, before we start, does anyone have any questions over what we'll be doing during the next two parts? And by two parts, I mean today and tomorrow of this review lecture. Okay, looks like there are no questions. So the first thing I'm going to start doing is creating my project setup. You'll see that I'm currently inside of this folder named review. It's going to be pushed into demos and notes, but I want to create a React project. So I'm going to go ahead and run npm create Vite. That will ask me what is the project name that I want to create. In this case, it will be the Rick and Morty. I will be utilizing the React framework with JavaScript. So we'll see that the Rick and Morty directory has now been created. I can change directory into Rick and Morty. I can run npm install to install all of the dependencies within my package.json. So if I take a look at package.json, I have dependencies and I have development dependencies, all of which need to be installed for my project. So by running npm install or npm-i, I am installing, apologize, we'll just stick with npm install. I am going to install all of those dependencies that I can see within package.json. So we can see it installing. Once this is finished installing, I'm going to be able to see that a node modules directory was created. That's going to hold all the specific things that I just installed from package.json. And then I can see that a package lock.json was created, which interacts with package.json and with my entire project to make sure that I'm able to import anything that I need throughout my project's folder structure. So does anyone have any questions about this so far? Okay, fantastic. I was able to install my project. My project was created. I'm going to empty out app.css. I'm going to empty index.css. And I'm going to move into app.jsx to be able to create my project. So for now, I'll just make an H1 that says Rick and Morty. Currently, I don't need this use state statement, so I'm going to take it off. All right, that's emptying all of my app. That emptied all of index and app CSS. The only other thing that I need to empty out now is main.jsx. Because it currently has strict mode, and I don't need strict mode to be able to do this project. Okay, great. Currently, the only thing that I have is localhost 5173. It's currently not running. Well, if I run npm run dev to run my development server, it's going to show me that my Vite is running at localhost 5173. So if I simply send that GET request all over again, it's going to render my app, and it's going to show me Rick and Morty, which is my H1 element within app.jsx. All right. So the Rick and Morty exercise looks like it needs a couple of pages. It needs an about page and a characters page for assignment 1. And all we're doing, and it needs a home page, an about page, and a characters page. Okay, and then it's also going to need some sort of error boundary. So it looks like the first thing that it's telling me is that we're going to add some navigation. So knowing that, there's a couple of things that I'm going to install off the top of my head. One, I know I'm going to install with the Rick and Morty API. So I'm going to run npm install Axios. That way I can send request to the Rick and Morty API. Okay, so now Axios is installed. The next thing I'll install will be React Router DOM. And that is what will allow me to create pages at specific URLs. Okay, so now I have React Router DOM. And the last thing I want is, well, I want to make some design because I don't want my folder to, or my project to just be completely empty. So I'm going to go over to BootStrap. I'm going to click on Get Started. I can see that it gives me my import statement here. And then there's one more thing that I need within main.jsx, and that's to import the CSS sheet from BootStrap. I'm actually going to place it above my index CSS. So if there's anything in BootStrap that I need to change, I could just override it within index CSS. Okay, great. So now I have all this information, everything was given, Rick and Morty is still rendering, and now I can actually start creating my project. Well, I just said that I want, oh, go ahead, Andrew.
Just real quick, could you show me how you got that import statement from Bootstrap? I lost you there.
This import statement, yeah, definitely. That's not coming from Bootstrap. That's actually coming from our curriculum. I am sending the current location of that import statement through the Zoom chat. If you look at our curriculum in lecture 4, components and utilities, and then go into the second part lecture of Bootstrap. If you scroll down under the header of installing React Bootstrap to a React Vite project, you can see in step 3, it gives you the import statement. Does that answer your question, Andrew?
Yes, it does. Thanks.
Of course. All right. Any other questions?
Yeah, Francisco, will that if you put that import line in another file like index, will it work or does it have to be in main?
This file won't work within, or this import statement won't work within index HTML. You can create a link tag to Bootstrap within index HTML.
Okay.
Yeah, but the import statement strictly a JSX or a JS6 convention, ES6, I apologize, convention. So if you want to move it over to app.jsx, it can create some weird behavior. Remember that main.jsx is what connects our app to index HTML. So that's the reason why we wanted to live here within main.jsx. Does that answer your question, Robert?
Yes, thank you.
Of course. Okay, so I got my dependencies installed. Now the next thing that I need is going to be a router. So I'm just going to open up 2 terminals here. I'm going to have one running my development server. And then I'm going to bring in another one that I can utilize to create files within my Rick and Morty project. So I'm going to go into source and I'm going to touch a router.jsx. And then I'm going to make a directory named pages and a directory named components. All right. So like I said earlier, I know that I need a couple of pages already. When I go into the assignment for Rick and Morty, it tells me that I need a home page. So I can now change directory into pages. I can make a homepage.jsx. I'd also need an about page.jsx and a characters page.jsx. Okay, what else is it that we need here? It looks like we're going to need an error boundary for a not found. So let's create that as well. So not found page.jsx. So now when I look at my pages, I can see I have all 4 of them. They're all being rendered, but currently they're all empty. So now let's go ahead and go through them and give them some values. So here we have my not found page. And actually, I'm going to take a small break here. I know I probably type a little bit faster, so I'll wait a second here just to make sure that everyone's folder structure is up to speed with mine. So again, what I did in this last couple of minutes is I created a directory named components, which is currently empty. I created a directory named pages, which is holding my about page, my characters page, a home page, and a not found page. Below that, I have app.jsx, and I also created a router.jsx, where I will be creating my React browser, or my browser router. There you go. All right, does anyone have any questions regarding this folder structure? Okay, great. I'm going to go ahead and continue pushing forward now. I'm going to open up About page and start creating this page component. This is just going to be a function that will return some HTML. And in this case, I'm going to make this HTML be an H1, or actually, let's make this an H2. It's going to say About page. And then I'm going to export default my About page. Going to move over to characters page. And I'm just going to change this from about to characters. Okay, so now I have my characters page as well. I'm going to move over to home page. Again, just going to change about over to home. And then finally, I'll go into my not found and change this from about to not found.
Hey, real quick, what command are you using to select every instance of that word about?
Yeah, I'm highlighting a specific certain number of text or characters that I see as repeated. And then I am using Command D as in Delta. And if you're on something that is not a Mac, it would be Control D as in Delta, I believe. And then as I click it, it's going to highlight the next word. And then after that, it highlights all of them. From there, I can just change whatever it is that I need to change. Does that answer your question, Brian?
Awesome. Yeah, thank you.
Of course. Okay, so I essentially created all of these components. I have my not found page that's returning an H2 element within fragmented tags. I put all of them inside of fragmented tags just because I know I'm going to actually add into the body. So not that way I don't have to worry about creating divisions later on. I just place them inside of fragmented tags. And actually my not found page, instead of being an H1, I probably want this to, instead of being an H2, I probably want this to be an H1. Okay, so that's my not found page. I have my home page rendering correctly. It's being exported in default. Same thing, my characters page is being exported as default, and my about page is being exported as default. But now I need to actually connect them so that they can render on my screen. Well, that's where router comes in. I'm going to go ahead and create my browser router now. So I'm going to import create browser router. And that's going to come from React router DOM. I know that I'm going to use app, so I need to import app as well. I'm going to import all of my pages that I just created. So now I'm going to go ahead and import each one of them individually. I hope that for all of you, VS Code is able to recognize the function and it's not making you manually type it out. Okay. And then I need my not found page. All right, so now I have my app, which I am going to give children to. I have all of my import statements that I need. I can see I have my home page, my about page, my characters page, and a not found page. So now I can go about creating this router. So now I'm going to say that I want to assign this to a constant variable. I'm going to utilize the create browser function. And you can see that when you utilize the create browser function, it gives you a hint. It tells you, hey, the create browser router function needs to have an iterable object or route objects. So I need some sort of array that has objects for each route. So the first thing that I'm going to define is my path at index. Well, my path at index needs to render my element of my entire application. That's what it should be rendering. It should be rendering my app. And then I can give it children. And this children is another array of paths. Well, if I want something like homepage to be rendered at the same time my app is rendered, I'm going to pass in the argument of index, make that true, saying, hey, at the same time my app is rendered in an empty path, I want you to render the following element. The element that I want to render is homepage. Then I need a path for my about page. So I'm just going to make it about. The element that it will render will be my about page. I need a path for characters. That's going to be my all characters page. Okay. And then finally, I'm going to need an error boundary, right? I used my 3 pages, but now I need to provide an error element. Well, we can see that here is the property of children, but I want to give it a new property of error element. So after the array, I need to place a comma because I am now making a new key value pair. Pass in the error element property. And for here, I'm going to pass in my not found page. And that creates my router. Finally, I'll export default that router. Okay, so just a quick recap. When I went to create this browser router, I imported create browser router from React router DOM. I then went on to import my app and all of the pages I have just created. None of them are in curly brackets because all of these components are being exported as default for their files. So now I'm able to bring in all of my pages. When I go to create my router, create browser router tells me that it takes in an array of objects for paths and elements to render. So the first thing I do is I open up an array, and then I open up an object holding my app's path. Well, now that path at an empty path will render the element of app. An app will have the following children. App will be able to render homepage, and homepage will have access to anything provided by the app. About page will be a child of app, and it will have access to anything provided by app. And characters page will also be a child of app and have access to anything provided by app. Now my error element is not within the array of children. That means that my error element will not have access to the values provided by app. And it is not going to render within app. It is actually going to render a completely different element instead of app. Right? These are two different pages that are being rendered if there is an error. Does anyone have any questions about how to create your browser router? Does anyone need me to slow down when I go about creating this browser router or for the following components?
I think maybe if you would just give a little bit of time at the end, that'd be great. But
Give a little bit of time by the end. Got it. Awesome. Okay. If there are no questions for me, then I have a question for you all. Why is it that not found page will not render within app, but homepage will render within app?
It's outside of the children.
It's outside of the children, right? It is not an element that is being rendered as a child to app. It is an element that's being rendered in case there is an error within the app. Okay, good. So now we have our error element, we have all of our information, and we're able to catch our paths in the way we need to. We're exporting this router, but it's currently not connected to our index.html, and it's also not connected. It's a stepchild, and it's currently not connected to app.jsx as far as the children goes. So let's first go over how do we connect this browser to index.html. So now we can see in index.html, the script that it runs is the main.jsx script. And if I go to main.jsx, main.jsx is currently just rendering the app. But I'm already taking care of that within my router. My router is telling it how to render the app or when to render it. So instead of main.jsx rendering my app, I wanted to render my router or the instructions that I'm providing through my router. So that means I need to import my router provider from React Router DOM because I am about to provide a router to index.html. So now I'm going to say router provider. I'm going to give it the element of router. Okay, so now we can see that Rick and Morty is rendering, but my app is only rendering Rick and Morty. So that means only my app is being rendered. So that's okay. That's the first part, right? That's the element that I'm telling it is to render my app. So that's working correctly. But currently my children aren't being displayed because if my children were being displayed, we would see the H2 element of homepage. So now these children need an outlet. They need to know that they're being connected to the app, and the app needs to know that it has children. So I'm going to go over to app.jsx, and I'm going to utilize the outlet. And outlet will be imported from React Router DOM. Now we can see that homepage is being rendered. If I open this up, I can go to /about. That will take me to my about page. I can go to /characters. That will take me to my characters page. And if I type in a bunch of gibberish, that will take me to my error not found page. Okay. So I just connected my browser. Again, we created our router and exported by default on line 30. Once it's being exported, I needed to connect to my index.html. Index.html currently only looks at the main.jsx script. So I need to come over to main.jsx and tell main.jsx that instead of rendering my app, which is here, I wanted to render the router that I just created. And I could do that by utilizing the router provider. So now I use the router provider to give it the route, and that connects my router to my index.html, allowing my browser to read the different routes. Now, app.jsx needs to know that it has children. And in order for it to have access to the children, I need to give it an outlet, letting it know that all of the children will render from the outlet. Does anyone have any questions about how to connect your router to your actual Vite application? Okay, perfect. So now that we have our router connected, we're able to do these things. We need some sort of way to be able to navigate between these different components, right? So I'm going to go ahead and create a header component. So I'm going to use my terminal, change directory into my components directory. And then I'm going to make a header.jsx. And I'm just going to simply take this h1 tag from here because I'm going to render it within my header. So now I can make the component header. Going to return HTML. So far, I just wanted to return the Rick and Morty. And let's try something different here. So currently, I'm not exporting header through a default value. I'm just utilizing export. So now if I just utilize export, how do I import the component of header into app.jsx?
Curly braces.
No, so I would import into curly braces header from components. And now I can make my header be able to render. Now we can see the h1 element show back up with Rick and Morty. Now again, we want some sort of navigation. And instead of going through the trouble of creating my own NavBar with my own styling, I'm going to go over to BootStrap. I'm going to go ahead and steal their navigation capabilities. So I'm going to go ahead and go over to their components section. They have NavBars available. I'm going to go ahead and take this first one here. Again, place it within my header. So let's take a look at how we can make this happen. Okay, here's all the import statements that I'm going to need. I'm just going to move those to the top of my file here. And now I'm just going to take the NavBar itself. Place this inside of a fragmented statement. Oh no. That's what happens when you copy and paste too much. See, this is what I need here. There it is. Okay, there's my NavBar. And if everything worked correctly, well, now when I go to my Vite application, I should see the NavBar being rendered through BootStrap. And there it is. All right, there's the NavBar. We can see that it's coming. The background body tertiary. Let's see if we can change that color somehow.
Francisco, can you put a link to that in the chat?
Link to this component here.
Yes.
I wonder if I can. Well, I'll send this. All right. Did that work, Clarice?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay. So now we can see our Rick and Morty here. I wonder if I can change the background color of this. Okay, BG body tertiary, navbar dash light. So I wonder what happens if I make this navbar dash dark. That only changed one thing about it. Doesn't seem to be working very well. Let's see what happens if I do it here. Let's see. If I scroll down, it should give me a table that tells me all the different things that I can do to it. Variant, light or dark. Okay. Not that work either. Navbar background dark. Are you trying to send me the answer, John? Thank you. Looks like John was able to figure it out. Let's see what he has here. Nice. So you give it the background dark, the data BS theme dark. Okay, it still expands as large and it's still tertiary. That makes sense. Thank you, appreciate it. Okay, for anyone missing that, it's on the chat. John Prado just sent it. It gave us all the the React alterations that we need to make this dark. Okay, and just to make sure that the reactiveness works, if I make this big, comes out to be big again. Nice. So here we see that it already gives us kind of like a React Bootstrap thing. So maybe instead of writing Rick and Morty in an H1 tag, I can just write Rick and Morty. Okay, and then it says href to here. So that's where I want it to go. And then it goes over into the different links. So currently I already have a home. I guess I could repeat it if I really want to, but I don't need to. So I'm just going to make this my characters. And I'm going to make this my about. And I definitely do not need a drop-down menu. So I'm going to get rid of that part. Okay, so currently I have my characters and about. I need this to go to /characters. I need to go to /about. So I refresh, I have my Rick and Morty. I can click on characters and it sends me to characters. I can click on about and it sends me to about. Now there's a problem when I utilize this NavBar that I'm seeing. Every time I click on another route, it's refreshing my entire browser. It's kind of mimicking the anchor tag. So I'm going to fix that by importing link from React Router. And now, interesting. Let's see. I'm going to make these two. And I'm going to take off this nav dot link. Wonder what happens if I do that. Okay, so I open it up. I can go to characters. I can go to about. We can see that the functionality has now changed. It's not triggering an entire re-render. And I can also change that here, but this is a brand.
I was able to fix that by using the as. So you can leave it as nav.link and navbar.brand. And if you add you obviously have to change the href to 2 equals, your link. And then you also add another attribute called as. And then as equals link.
Interesting. Let's do nav.
Yeah, so I did as equals open curly brackets, close curly brackets, and inside that just put link. And then it'll keep that CSS styling.
Awesome. That is a good trick. Yep, and it's not triggering a complete refresh. That's awesome. So we could probably just do that for the brand as well. Maybe we can do an as here, make it to a link, and then change this to a 2. Yep. Everything's working correctly. There's no re-render, and we have our link functionality from React Router done, while still keeping our CSS from React Bootstrap. Okay, great. This takes care of my navigation. My page is coming together. For now, my homepage, I'm just going to go ahead and give it some lorem ipsum that we can maybe style later on. So let's go ahead and go into our homepage and give it some styling. And before I move on into the homepage and give it some styling, does anyone have any questions regarding this header or what we just did to be able to create this header navbar?
Yes, can you just just pause for a second so I can finish copying down?
Of course.
Thanks.
Hey, Francisco.
Mhm.
So that as link is only necessary when you're using Bootstrap, right? Like it allows you to use the built-in Bootstrap stuff and access it as a link.
Exactly. So I'm saying, hey, I still want you to utilize the Bootstrap styling that we have. But rather than just utilizing the functionality that you have, I want you to recognize it as a link component. And that link component is from React Router DOM.
Pretty sick. Thank you.
Of course.
Francisco, did you get rid of your H1 and H2 elements in the different pages because now your header is giving you Rick and Morty at the navbar?
I got rid of the H1 element for Rick and Morty, and I placed it inside of my navbar as the brand, right? All of my other pages did not have an H1 element. They only have H2 elements. So I can still go to characters and see my characters page, and I can still go to about and see about page. Does that answer your question, Josh?
Yes, thank you.
Of course.
Good to go. Thank you.
Of course. Any other questions?
I have a question. Is it weird that you're exporting at the top and not like export default?
What do you mean by weird?
Well, usually we do the export default and we're not doing that.
Yeah, definitely. So again, just to emphasize, this is definitely user preference. If we just utilize export, that means I could have other functions within this file that I can import. I specifically did export on this file so that we can see it within app.jsx and see the difference. Now our import of header had to be within curly brackets because header is only being exported. Whereas if I look in my router, all of my pages were being imported directly without curly braces because every single one of these components are under an export default statement. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, great. So now that I have my navbar, I have my pages set up, I can actually start putting some functionality. And I think the first thing I said we could tackle was going to be our homepage. So let me open up the homepage here. Currently, I have an H2 that says homepage. Maybe I want to make it more like, welcome to the Rick and Morty. I don't know. Fan page, why not? And then in here, I can have a division. This division can just say, I'm probably gonna want a parent division actually. And for now, I'm just gonna do some lorem ipsum. Yeah. I'm gonna go to the home page. We can see welcome to the Rick and Morty fan page. That's quite a bit of text. Maybe just Rick and Morty fan page, why not? There we go. And we can see some text inside of lorem ipsum. And probably want that inside of a p tag, maybe. Okay. Now I want to be able to format this a little better. And what I mean by that is that currently my application, it's not the best as far as responsiveness or display wise. So I want to actually be able to center things and kind of manipulate where information is being rendered depending on my app.jsx. So I'm going to take a look at app.jsx here, and I can see that I have a header and an outlet. But I know that React Bootstrap provides to me a layout for grid that I can use to provide a specific layout to my page. So I'm going to go ahead and send a link to grid here on the chat. And I'm actually going to create a grid for my app. So I'm going to say import grid, or sorry, container from React Bootstrap. I also need to import row. And I'm also going to import column. Okay. So now all three of these are being imported, but I actually want to utilize them then. All right, I want my app to have a container. So I'm going to go ahead and say container. And just by doing that, we're going to see that my app is going to look quite a bit different if there wasn't a syntax error. Container. The requested module. Interesting.
Is it because you typed them into those like empty brackets? Or should that not make a difference?
No, that shouldn't make a difference. It's telling me something, it's telling me something else is a problem. But the question is,
I think the ESM might be the problem.
think so? Let's try it out. Let's see. There it is. Okay, so now we can see that everything's a little bit more responsive. Things are staying a little bit more centered. But there's something else going on here. All right, if I take a look now, or if I took a look at my elements, I take a look at my container, that's my root. Well, now container has a considerable amount of margin that I want to take off. So I'm just going to give this an ID of holder, or maybe I could just make this. I'm just going to make it holder because it's going to hold everything, right? So I can go into app CSS, enter holder, do the ID. I can give it a margin of 0. Saying I don't want it to have any margins. Well, now let's take a look at what we have here. And take a look at my holder. My holder now has no margins, but is not being displayed center. Right, so now there's a little bit of CSS that I need to do. It looks like one, my root is not my entire viewport width and viewport height. So let's change that. Okay, so now when I hover over root, we can see that root is 100% of my view width and 100% of my view height. And I want my holder to hold all of the space of my root. So I'm just going to say my holder will have a height matching 100% of its parent element and a width holding 100% of its parent element. Again, here's my root. I scroll down to my holder. So now my holder is holding 100% of its height, but it doesn't seem to be holding 100% of the width, matching the root. So let's take a look at why that is. So if I scroll down, click on my container seems to have some padding, no borders. And my root seems to be taking the entire space. So I wonder why this isn't stretching all the way. Well, since it's not occupying the entire space that I wanted to utilize, I'm going to go ahead and change this to 100% of the view width. Interesting. Well, let's take a look at what other CSS is being applied here, because something is stopping it from growing.
Can you also set the padding to 0?
Isn't it the max width for the at above at the top?
Can you see a max width? I'm looking.
Yeah. Above that. There's another one. Yep. I think you have to disable both those, and then yours would be called.
Got it. Okay. So we can give it a default max width of 100%. Percent. Okay, well now when I take a look at it, there's my holder. So here's my root, my holder's right under it. It's still a little bit weird because if I look at the edges, it's not touching, and that's because of my padding. So I also want to take off the padding. Make that 0. There it is. We finally have an application that's touching all of our squares. Great. Well, now that helps a little bit. Let me go ahead and create a row here because I want a row that will hold my header. And then I want a row that will hold my outlet. Okay, so now for this row, oh no, what's going on with you? Okay, let me go ahead and I need to change that view width for my CSS. 100% view width. Something is making the scroll bar populate. I'm trying to figure out what it is that's bleeding out. So it's not my division. It's not my holder. It's my rows. Okay, so maybe we can enter class row and give it a width of 100% once again. All right, well, our rows also have some CSS being applied into it. Let's take a look at what that is. My rows, nope, that seems margin. It has a negative margin. Interesting. Okay, there it is. My scroll bar going left to right is now finally gone. Okay, so now I have my rows. My rows have been adjusted. My header has been created and it's being captive. But now I want this to be somewhat centered, right? I want there to be a little bit of space on the left and right and have this centered. Well, I can definitely give it manual advice here, but instead, what I'm going to do, how do I want to do this? I'm going to give this division here an ID of homepage. And then within app CSS, I'll go ahead and style homepage. I'm going to give it a display flex. My flex direction will be column. And then what I will do is I will give it a, what else can I do here? Interesting. I think what I wanted to do is I wanted to have a height, a fixed height of maybe 50% of its parent and a width of maybe 70% of its parent. Okay, so now we can see that it's in display flex. The flex direction is column. When I can align items center. Interesting, that only moved that. And then justify content center. Text line. Okay, so now we can see that I moved a couple of things. We're getting a little bit of an unexpected behavior. So now I'm wondering why that's happening. So let's go ahead and inspect that as well. So here we have our home page. Our home page is currently pinned to the left-hand side. That's because our row has it pinned to our left-hand side. So now we need to enter a row. Within row, I need to apply display flex. And I need to justify the content center. So I don't necessarily need this. All right. So now the final thing that I want to do is I want to give it a little bit of a background and a border. So I'm going to go ahead and give it a background color of gray. Ooh, that's pretty dark. I'm going to give it a border of 3. Let's go with vmin. Let's actually make that one vmin. I'm going to make it solid, and it's going to be black. Then I'm just going to give a border radius of 3 vmin. Go with 5. Okay. And finally, I wanted to have a margin because I don't want it to just be attached to everything. And this margin will just be 15 vmin. Okay, so there you go. Now I have my little Rick and Morty fan page, and then here I could have a quick introduction over something that could get me to watch Rick and Morty. So that was a lot of CSS and a lot of project setup. We can see that it's being reactive now. As I close it or open it, it's moving along with my page. I'm not getting any weird behavior where anything's populating outside. And that's one of the biggest features coming from container. All right, and then maybe I can go into the Victor channel and share this code here. That way everyone has access to it. And I also want to share my app.jsx here. Okay, I did quite a bit of styling. Does anyone have any questions over any of the styling that I did or anything that we've covered so far? Could I share header as well? Definitely.
What was the thing that you would like unchecked in the console? Or in the inspect?
Could you say that one more time, Anna?
Yeah, I was just wondering what it was, like the boxes that you were unchecking when you were inspecting it.
Oh, got it. So if I take a look, oh, why am I getting errors here? Fail to resource for 2500 app.jsx. Okay. If I take a look at my body here, or I take a look at any component that I've created, inside of the console, I can actually manipulate some of the information that's being rendered. So for example, inside of this container, I currently have 2 rows. In my second row, I have my home page, right? And if I click on home page, we can see that I have all the CSS that I provided for it. Well, these boxes are saying that the CSS is applying. If I want to manipulate it to see how it would look, I could simply come in here and maybe change it to, I don't know, 75. Right, and it would change it to 75 and show me what it looks like here. Or I could just take off the entire property and show me what it would look like if I didn't have the property by unchecking it. If I check it back, it brings back the property. I can also manipulate anything provided by BootStrap. This is all coming from the row from BootStrap. Excuse me. And that's it. That's all these boxes do. They just allow me to apply or unapply different styling that's currently being applied. Does that answer your question, Anna?
Yes, thanks.
Any other questions?
Yeah, Francisco, so just to understand properly, you're using grid to set up your rows and columns, and then you're then like customizing how that looks like using the CSS. I guess I'm just asking because I know grid also has some options for some bootstrap elements for manipulating the grid. I guess that might maybe for like something else though.
Sorry, I
guess what
want with your question. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I guess what I'm asking is you're using grid to set up the structure, and then you're then using custom CSS to manipulate how that looks in how the grid looks.
Yes, that's what I'm doing in this case. There may be some grid. I know there is grid options to be able to change a couple of things. But as far as I know, when it comes to, for example, the border or the margin that was provided around the grid, I don't think there's a way to take that off. So there's a couple of things that come custom with Bootstrap that doesn't give you the option to take it off, right? I could change it to small, large, or medium, but that's not actually going to take off the margin or the padding that was provided within it. It may change the sizes of it, but it's still going to be there. So in order for me to manually take that off, since Bootstrap doesn't give me the option to do that myself, I have to do it through my own CSS sheet. Does that answer your question, Robert?
Yes, that does. Thank you.
Hey, Francisco, I had a quick question. In
Yes.
the app.jsx, when you created the containers with the rows, you didn't explicitly define the class row on the CSS. So when you import those elements or create those elements, do they automatically get assigned to a class with the same name?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. So once I created this element, right, or I made these rows, if I go and inspect, when this gets rendered as actual HTML, we can see that we actually get a division that has a class of row. So when I went into app CSS, I was able to manipulate that class by utilizing .row. So once this gets interpreted, it's creating a class of row, and that's why I was able to manipulate that value. Does that answer your question, Eric?
Yeah, thanks.
Of course. All right, we've been going on for quite a while now. It is now 10:05. Let's go ahead and take a 10-minute break. Let's come back at 10:15 and continue the lecture. All right, welcome back, everyone. Currently, we just finished working on our homepage. Our homepage is now functional. I can collapse my hamburger menu up here. I have grid to be able to manipulate my my homepage and my responsiveness. But now I actually want to go ahead and fix up my characters page. Well, let's go into our characters page and let's work in creating a character, a function that will get us all of our characters from the Rick and Morty API and display cards for every single card. I mean, for every single character within the Rick and Morty API. So let's go to the Rick and Morty API here. We can look at their documents. And from their documents, we can then, well, probably want to bring up the menu here. We can then see how to get all characters. Okay. And we can see that they have a total of 826 characters, but they haven't divided in pages. And these pages seem to iterate between 1 through 42. Let's go ahead and grab this API link here. And now let's actually create our function. So I want to create a function that will be asynchronous for getting all characters. This function will take in a page number. And what it's going to do is it's going to send an Axios request. So I'm going to say response is equal to page, or sorry, to await. And like I said, this is going to be an asynchronous function. And it's going to await Axios to get a response from the following page. And then once it gets that response, I need to save the character somewhere. So it looks like I'm going to need two useState functions. I'm going to need one for a page. Which will be initialized at 1. And I'm going to need one for a character, for the characters. Which is going to be an empty array. Okay, so once this response comes back, if I take a look at the getAllCharacters, it looks like they're going to be coming back in results. So I can say set characters, and I want to set them to characters plus the new value of response.data.results. And then I want to set page to page plus 1. Ooh. I see the issue here. So let's name this my page. And then set my page. There we go. Okay. So now I want this function to be triggered every time the application renders. And then I also wanted to do it every time page changes because I want this to happen for all 42 pages. So now what I'm going to say is I'm going to make a use effect that will send this getAllCharacters request. And I'm going to pass in, I guess I don't even have to pass in page. I could just reference that here. Then it's going to trigger my getAllCharacters function. I want it to happen every time the value of my page changes. So this is going to create some sort of loop, right? But I only wanted to do this if my page is less than 43. The moment that my page is 43, it's not going to trigger the function, and therefore it's not going to do anything. So now I can come over here, inspect my console. I shouldn't be seeing any errors once I refresh. I'm getting an Axios is not defined. So let's go ahead and import Axios from Axios. Okay, all my errors are gone. Maybe I want to see what's inside of all characters. So I'm just going to create a different use effect that will log to the console the value of characters. And I wanted to do this every time the value of characters is updated. So now that we can see, that characters is an array of 42 arrays. Well, I don't necessarily want it to make 42 arrays. I want them all to be one single array. I wonder how I could do that. Let's see, what comes back in response.results?
I think the use effect is updating every time because my page is changing.
Yeah, it's supposed to do that, right? Because it's getting me all the different values. But what I want to see is Okay. So it looks like from request. So I wonder if I could do something like this. There you go. Nice. So now I'm getting one massive array of 826 characters. Each one of them with their individual objects and so on. Okay. Great. So now I'm able to grab all characters from the Rick and Morty API. All 826 are being brought in. And I no longer need this use effect to log it onto my console. All right. So now to actually get something to render on the screen. I actually want to see this happen, right? Well, I'm going to go ahead and import something else from BootStrap. And actually, before I move into importing anything from BootStrap, does anyone have any questions over this logic here?
Just that at the top of the page where you have constant. Okay, so the constant characters page, and then under that, you have use state 1. Does that mean page 1?
Right. So my page is currently being initialized as the value of 1. So when I reference my page, that is equal to 1.
Okay. Got it. Thanks.
Of course.
Can you go over what you did again to get it into a massive array?
Yeah. So in order to get it into a massive array is 1, I destructured the previous array that I currently have within characters, right? Now response.data was coming in as an array as well. And currently what I was doing is I was just adding arrays into my characters array. So I was getting an array of arrays. And that's not what I wanted. I wanted one array of objects. So what I needed to do was destructure the response.data.results so that instead of adding the array of objects, I was just adding all the objects within the array. Right, and this is called a lot. This is the spread operator.
Copy that. Copy that. Thank you.
Of course.
Francisco, can you slide to the right? What did you put into the just want to see it. All right, thank you.
Do you need me to zoom in or anything?
Nope, I got it. Thank you.
Was the ID homepage given to a division holding the H2 and P for home? Are you talking about the homepage? Was this your question?
Yes.
Well, what's the question?
Oh no. Yeah, I was just wondering if you gave that H2 and P tag a div to sit in, and this is my question. Thanks.
Oh, of course. Yeah, no problem.
What was the reason compared to 43 on the use effect?
The reason for line 483, or did you say 43?
No, right there, line 15.
Okay, so line 15 for the use effect. Got it. So this use effect needs to be able to call the getAllCharacters, right? And I want to get all the characters for each individual page. So I needed some sort of stepper. So this is what my page to my page plus 1 is. It's a stepper. I'm saying go to the next page after you get it once, right? Well, I need this to continuously trigger. And instead of doing a while loop or doing some for loop, I'm doing this using React hooks. That way I have control over what's going on. So I'm telling it every time the value of my page changes, I want you to run this function, right? So first it triggers when it renders. So when it renders, my page is currently 1. It is less than 43, so it runs getAllCharacters. Gets the response. Once it gets the response, it adds it. to all the characters. And then it makes the value of my page change from 1 to 2. Well, now in my dependency list, I'm saying, hey, if the value of page changes, run this function again. So I change the value of page, telling this to run again. 2 is still less than 43, so it runs getAllCharacters again, and it runs that for every page from 1 till 42. Does that answer your question, Dakota?
That's good, thank you.
Of course.
Hey, for instance, so the if my page less than 43, are you just hard coding 43 because you know there's 43 pages?
Yes, if I go here, it tells me there's 42 pages, so I just need it to be less than 43, so I can grab all the way up to 42.
Okay, got you. Because I guess you could also maybe do like a dot length somewhere and grab that instead of hard coding it, or like or would you always just want to reference this in API somewhere?
Oh, you're saying like if I would I want to grab this from the API? I could create a use state that says like max number of pages, and then when it comes back with this response, I can set it to the max number of pages.
Okay. Yeah, okay, that makes sense. So like if you weren't sure, you could do something like that instead.
Right.
Okay, got it.
Okay. It looks like we have our characters now, and now we can actually render some cards. So let's grab some cards from React Bootstrap. Come down to cards. I always just grab the first one. All right. And I'm just going to create a component for cards. So I'm going to make a component for a character card. Okay. Now this component is going to be a card from Bootstrap. And instead of naming it basic example, I'm going to name it character card. Can you send link? Definitely. There's a link to the React Bootstrap. Okay, so I grabbed the code from React Bootstrap. I made it. I changed the name of this card, and it's still being exported through default value. So now when I go to my characters page, well, I wanted to show a card for every single one of my characters. So now what I can do is say, I want you to iterate through characters through the map function. I want to reference each character as a mapping function. And I want to return, and that's why I'm doing open brackets instead of curly brackets, because what's going to be within this open bracket will be a return statement. And I want to return the character card. Now it's going to ask me for a key, and I believe if I look at my document here, every object has an ID, so that's already unique. So I can just say that the key will be the character.id. Okay, well now let's take a look at what our project looks like. Now our project, oh, this might be a lot. Maybe I want to have some sort of counter here. Let me give it, how could I do this? Maybe I can add a fragmented tag real quick. I apologize, everyone. I just want to make sure that there's actually 820 characters. So I'm just going to place the ID here. Okay. That's not necessarily looking the best way that I wanted to, but if I scroll all the way down to the bottom, we can see I have all 826 characters or 826 cards displaying. Great. So for 826 objects, I have 826 cards. But now I actually want to pass the correct information in there. Well, if I look at my example, I can see that I have a name that's being passed. So that's something that I would want to show here. And I also have a URL or an image. And that's something that I also want to show. So let's pass that in. So I want to show the name. I don't need this fragmented tag anymore. As a prop into my character card. And I'm just going to pass in the name of said character. I also want to pass in the image. And that will just be a character's image. Okay. So now I'm passing these two properties in as props. If I go to my character card, I can destructure props and grab name and image and display both of them. I'm going to change the source to be image. And I'm going to change the card title to be name. Oh, that's TL draw. Here you go. Okay, so it looks like a couple of them are broken. Oh, never mind. I just need some time to load. We can see all 826 characters that they have in the Rick and Morty show. Okay. Does anyone have any questions about props or how this is working so far?
So just to clarify, when you map through the character here, you're passing, is it the ID, name, and image to care card as a prop, since it's a child of characters page. Is that correct? Accurate?
Yeah, so I'm passing the key of the ID, right? So each object has is an object, or everything that I'm iterating through here, this array of objects that I'm iterating through, has an object inside of it that provides to me the ID, the name, and the image for each character. So I want those to render inside of the card, so I'm basically just passing it in to the card as a property. Right? Just like a function takes in parameters, a component takes in props. So I pass in name and image, and then I can grab name and image from within the component and render it. Does that answer your question, Robert?
Yeah, that makes sense. Thanks.
Do you only pass props into components?
Yes, I want to say that anything that you're going to pass in a prop to will be into a component or or some sort of functional oriented component, but it will always be a component. Does that answer your question, Anna?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Great. If there are no questions, let's go ahead and take a look at the next portion of our Rick and Morty API. What else do they need us to do? So currently we have a card rendering for every one of them. We have routes. We have a NavBar that we created. We're styling with React Bootstrap. Maybe our about page could use some work, right? Because I don't think we've touched our about page at all. Well, let's make our about page pretty similar to our homepage then. I'm gonna close all this white noise so that we don't have to interact with it. So I'm gonna bring up homepage. I can see that I have the ID of homepage as the reference here. I want my about page to look pretty similar. So I'm just gonna go ahead and throw that in there. And now my about page, I'm also going to create a p tag that has two lorem ipsum strings. Okay, so now I have my characters page. I can go to my home page, gives me Rick and Morty with lorem ipsum. I can go to about, gives me my about page with lorem ipsum. Maybe instead of naming it about page, I can name it about Rick and Morty. All right, and then characters, instead of making it characters page, maybe I can make this. I'm not sure. What should I make this characters page into? Characters? That makes sense. Okay, and then I also don't like the way that it's flushed. So I'm just gonna give this H2 element a quick margin. Okay, there you go. So now I have my characters. It's able to show me each individual character. It's being responsive. If I open it up, we can see that my cards start flushing, and that's coming from the effects of row, right? It's automatically triggering my flex wrap. So now I have all three of my character cards showing up. Everything's showing up nice and pretty. If I really wanted to get maybe some spacing in between each one of those character cards, I can go over to my character card. And here in style, they're giving it a width of 18 rem. Well, I can give it a margin as well. And that margin could be 0 for top and bottom, and maybe one v min for left and right. So now we can see there's a little bit of spacing between each one of them, but maybe 1v min all around wouldn't be too bad. There you go. We have our cards. Okay, great. Does anyone have any questions over any styling or anything that we've done so far?
Yeah, I just have one quick question about the characters mapping.
Mhm.
What's going to be the problem if you pass in the index rather than the character ID or the object's ID?
What would be the problem?
Yes.
There wouldn't be a problem because the index would also be unique. But if I had multiple mapping functions within here and both of them were using the index as their key, then they would no longer be unique. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, great. Any other questions?
I'm not getting the cards to pull up. I'm not sure what I missed.
Huh.
Same. I was wondering like what's in the nav bar. I think that
Yeah,
might be
same
my
here.
issue.
In the nav bar, interesting. As far as the card to pull up, is there an import statement? And I guess I would have to see the error. What error are you getting?
Oh, there we go.
I'm not getting any errors in the console or anything. I've got imported chart card, Axios, all that stuff. The code looks right on the characters page.
Okay. In the Victor
Right.
channel, you just sent both the characters page and the card code.
Yes, sir.
All right. Let's see. What else? could I send? Did I change any? I don't think I changed anything else. Oh, the about page. Oh, did you send me your code? Got it.
And that's the characters page. Yeah, and that's CharCard.
You have curly brackets instead of open and closing parentheses in your mapping function. In your
No, I always do that. Thank you.
Of course.
I have a question.
Yes.
So when we clicked off of those styling elements in the inspect tool, are those changes permanent or do we need to do something else? Like, is it gonna do that again on reload?
Yeah, that's a great question. So whatever you make changes to the console. So if I go over here and I look at all the styles, if I click on anything, right, or I try to unapply any sort of margin or styling or anything like that, that's only going to apply during this session or while you're currently viewing it. The moment you run a get request again, that's going to render your entire code in CSS file again. So if you want this to stay, you have to change your code to reflect the changes that you made on the console. Does that make sense, Clarice?
Yes. So then I'm like, where are they hiding these imaginary things where they keep changing the max width?
Got it. So those things are coming in from within React Bootstrap. So because it's coming in from React Bootstrap, you have to manually override it by either accessing the CSS, the CSS within the class that gets provided to you, if you can see the class, right? Sometimes I have trouble just being able to identify where exactly this stuff is coming from. Like, for example, this one, right? I'm not exactly sure how I could access this information. So what I would do is I would give it an ID to this element within my CSS file or my HTML file or my JSX file, I apologize, so that I can reference the ID to overwrite whatever is coming in from React Bootstrap.
Okay.
Awesome. Getting a margin is not defined in CharCard element styling. Let's see. So that's in CharCard. Let me go ahead and find that component real quick. You're saying this is causing an error?
Yes. In the console, it's like I'm getting like 826 errors when it's loading.
Huh. Why would that be causing an error? Interesting. It looks exactly the same. Where else did we add a margin to? Was it in characters page that we added a margin? What does this one look like?
So I haven't added that one yet.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I may have to see this error. Let me go ahead and pause the recording so that we can share your screen.
Your links aren't working, isn't working.
Your what isn't working? I apologize.
So the link when I try to click on characters or about in my navbar, it's not even working.
Your characters are about and your navbar is not working.
Yeah.
What is your router? What does it do when you click it? Nothing?
Nothing. It says that it's doing something, but it's not. Like when I look at it in Elements, it says link active, but that's about it. It'll say nav link active.
All right. Welcome back, everyone. So currently our Rick and Morty project is coming along pretty well. We can see our initial page, which is our home page. We can go over to characters and see a card for every individual character. And we can go to our about page and see what our about page would look like. This is great. But now what if I wanted to see one individual character? I believe that's our next phase. So let's go ahead and break that down. What needs to happen in order for me to see one individual character? Well, one, I need to check the API to make sure that the API can give me the information for one individual character so that I can see an individual character page. And two, I need to create some dynamic routing so that this page can actually render or send that request utilizing that character's ID. So let's see, here we have getAllCharacters, and now we have getASingleCharacter. And it gives me the information that I need to be able to see one specific character. So let's take a look at what that looks like. Here's my character. Let's make our pages. Let's get to it. So I'm going to change directories here into my pages. And within my pages, I'm going to create a character page. Maybe I want to name it a character just so that it's a little bit different. And then I'm going to open a character page. Now within this character page, I'm going to make the function of a character. This function will be a component that will return a single character. So it looks like first I'm going to need a use state for a character. And this needs to be initialized as null. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say if the character exists, and I want it to render my character division. So I'm just going to name it div h1 character. But if it does not exist, then I don't want it to render anything, so I'm just going to place null. Okay. So now if the character exists and it is no value, I want you to render that. Otherwise, just say no, nothing's going on here. Next, I want to build my function. So let's get a character. This is going to be an asynchronous function that doesn't take in any arguments. And it's going to grab a response from an API. So I will await for that response from Axios, sending a GET request. That's not it. To the URL we just copied. Okay, great. And once it gets that response, I will set my character to response.data. Okay. I want this to happen every time the page renders. So I will place it within a use effect that will call getACharacter with an empty dependency list to get me a new character every time. All right. And then finally, I want to export default get or a character. this is all set up pretty well. I have 50% of the answer here, but now I'm going to move on to actually rendering it within my router. Right? I don't need all this other pages here. I'm going to go over to my router and I'm going to create a path for it. So my path will be a character slash, and I need to pass in a parameter named ID because I'm going to need that character's ID in order to render the correct character. And the element that will be rendered will be my ACharacter page. Okay, so now a character ID, it renders the element of a character. All of this is plugged in correctly. But now how do I grab that ID from the URL? Well, in order to get that ID from the URL, I would need to utilize useParams. So I can say that I want to grab the ID from useParams from React Router DOM. Now I can exchange these quotation marks and I can use interpolated string to grab that character by ID. Okay. Does anyone have any questions over what I just built?
Just a short pause.
Oh, did I go a little too fast? I apologize. I might have taken off. I'll do a
flying. Just
Oh.
a tactical pause.
Roger. Let me see if I can get this to show the entire screen a little better. Is that better? Okay. And then I'll also share this within the Victor channel. Okay.
What is useParams doing again there?
Say again?
What is the useParams doing again on line 6?
Yeah. Let me do a quick overview of what's going on here. So I want to grab a single character's information by the ID. So I went over to the Rick and Morty API and I saw that I can grab a single character, but I just need the ID parameter. So now I need to be able to grab this ID from somewhere. Well, I know that the functionality that I have right now is that when I go to see all my characters, it renders a card for every single one of my characters. So what I did is I created dynamic routing so that when I click on that button on that card, it will take me to character/ID. Here I am telling this URL or this path that this is going to be a parameter. This could be a string, this could be an integer, and it's going to take it into the URL and make it accessible for the element of a character. And I know that this is a parameter because it has a colon in the front. So now within a character, one, I need some place to hold that character. So I create a useState function. And two, I need to grab that ID argument from my URL. So I say, hey, there should be an ID parameter being passed, the parameter, within React Router DOM. So it looks at the router. It says, this is the page we're rendering. And then it looks at the path and says, you're right, there is an ID that is being passed here. So it returns that value to the constant of ID. Then we send our request utilizing interpolated string to include the ID that we just passed into the URL. And we set our character's value to this object that's coming back from the response in order for us to render information onto the screen.
What is the question mark after character all about?
Yeah, so this is utilizing ternary operators. This is utilizing an if and else statement. All right. And essentially what it's saying is, hey, if character has a value, then I want you to render this division. This colon is where my else statement comes in. So if character is a truthy statement, it will render a division. But if character is a falsy statement, it won't render anything. It will just show nothing on the screen. And actually, maybe instead of showing nothing, we can put a spinner in there. I think React Bootstrap has spinners. There it is, spinner. Well, that's pretty easy. So let's grab that. This. Put this import statement on top, and I just realized I don't have Axios, so let me import Axios. And I don't need this. Oh. Okay, so now if character does exist, it's going to show me a character. Otherwise, it's going to show me a spinner. Any questions so far? Oh, and then just in case somebody wants a link to the spinner. Ternary, thank you, appreciate it. That was very much needed. Is there any file anyone would like to see or any questions that anybody has?
You haven't rendered anything for a character, right?
No, not yet. Okay, let's go ahead and keep pushing. So currently we have a character page. I'm going to zoom back in here and we have our router. Well, now I need a way to actually get there. Well, if I look at my card has a button that can get me some information. Maybe I could get rid of this card text and I can say, instead of go somewhere, I want to see the details pertaining to this one individual. So now, since I want to see the details to this one person, well, I need to be able to navigate over to that URL. So currently that URL is expecting to receive an ID. And if I look at the components or the props that my component is receiving, it's not receiving an ID. So I need to go to the character page to pass in the ID prop. So now I have a key and I'm passing a prop named ID so that within my card, I can grab that ID from props and then I can navigate to see the details. So now I'm going to make a constant named navigate, and that's going to be equal to use navigate from React router DOM. So I'm going to import use navigate from React router DOM. And that's going to give me the navigate function so that whenever somebody clicks on this button, I can give it an onClick method and I can tell it that it will, upon this being clicked, it will navigate to the following URL. And the URL that I'm going to provide to it will be character slash and then the ID that was passed into it. So let's take a look at what's going on now. What did we just update? And why do we need to update it? Okay, so first things first. when I'm rendering my my cards need to have access to the ID as a prop. I wasn't passing the ID before, so I'm passing it in now in line 30. Then I'm moving on to my character card. And in my character card, I am destructuring props to grab the name property, the image property, and the ID property. I know that I'm going to need to navigate to a different URL within my React router. So I'm bringing in useNavigate so that when a user clicks on a button, this button will navigate to a character endpoint. And if I look at my router, here's my endpoint matching character. And then I will pass in the ID that's corresponding to that card, giving a value to :ID as a parameter. Okay, so that takes care of these two pages. Well, then in ACharacter, I will utilize useParams to grab that ID from the URL. My use effect will get triggered, which will then send a request to the Rick and Morty API for that matching ID and set my character as the response.data. Does anyone have any questions over what I just covered?
Can you go back to the card real quick?
Yes, to the card, you said? I think the caffeine is speeding me up. I apologize, everyone.
No worries.
All right. Doesn't seem like there are any other questions. So finally, let's take a look at what this is rendering. Okay, so it looks like we're getting an error here. Let me make sure my browser is running, so it is. If I look into my console, I'm getting some sort of syntax error happening at ACharacter.page.jsx. Does not provide an export named default. Well, ACharacter, there it is. And we do have an export default of ACharacter. There you go. Just needed a real quick refresher. Okay, you can take a look at my characters. I can see that all of my characters are being rendered. When I click on details, I'm getting a page not found. Well, if we take a look at my URL here, I'm currently going to localhost/characters, but then it goes to character/8. Well, that's because in my card, inside of my navigate function, I need to add a prepending slash. So now if I go back, run my refresh, I can go back and now click on the agency director. I get my spinner. My character comes back from my request, and then I can see my character. But I haven't added any code to actually display the character, which is why currently we just see that happening. Does anyone have any questions over this so far? Okay, let's make our character. So once this comes back, instead of showing me character, I would probably want it to show me a couple of properties here. So in this H1 element, I would want it to show me the actual name of said character. So I'm going to say character dot name. I would want to see an image. So I'm going to add an image tag here where the source will be character dot image. What else could we add here? Maybe we could add I guess, species. Let's see. What could I do here? Maybe an unordered list. That would be good. So species, and then make that character dot species. Oh. Looks like they have gender in the API, so we could put that in there as well. And then locate origin and location doesn't seem like they're different, but why not add both? Let's have origin. And origin should be within character dot origin dot name. And then location should be within character dot location dot name. What else should there be? I guess we don't really need episodes. Created? What does this mean by created? Like this is when the character was created in 2017? Wow, that's cool. So character dot created. Okay, so now all this information will render for a character. Let's take a look what that looks like. Okay, so here's our agency director. He has an H1 tag. Let me clear out the console and make sure we don't actually have any errors. His species is human, male, origin is Earth, location is origin Earth, and they are within the replacement dimension. Okay. Let's go back to all of our characters. Let's pick a weird one here. Okay, we saw that spinner pop up while we got our alien. So here's Blim Blam. We don't know his current origin, but we do know that he is within the replacement dimension. And yeah. It's going to be like that for almost all of our characters now. Now we can add some styling. But before we start going into styling, does anyone have any questions over the ACharacter page?
Am I losing my mind or did they change the API?
I have no idea. I didn't see a change. Can anyone else answer that question? I think you're losing your mind, Brian.
Must be losing my mind.
Yeah. All right. So let's start styling this. We have our ACharacter page. We want this to be displayed correctly. We currently have it within an H1 element. Let's take a look here. Okay, so here's our adjudicator, Rick. All right. And we can see that everything here is being displayed. Well, let's run let's give it an ID of a character. And let's go into some CSS. So now I can access a character. I know that it is currently on display block, but I can say a character image. Maybe I want this to float left. Okay, so we see that the float left kind of works, but then that dots kind of override it. So maybe we want it floating right. I wonder if that would look better. Okay, that does look a little better. I don't like how that adjudicator Rick is up there, kind of outside of this division. What if I do this? There you go, much better. Okay, and now within app CSS, maybe we can do something to make a character a little more pleasant as far as visually appealing. So let's see if we can do something. Give it a margin so that it separates from the top. So let's give it a margin top of 10 v min. Okay, let's give it a border. Let's make it solid. And yeah, let's make it 3 v min. Black. Give it a border radius of 5 v min. Okay, and then finally, let's give it a background color of gray. I don't like how that looks. Gainsborough looks pretty good. Cool. Okay, so now we have our educator rig. If I open this up, we can see that this is kind of just spreading instead of actually staying centered. So maybe I want to give this a character a determined width. And let's make that width 70%. Well, that doesn't work very well. Maybe we give this image a width of 70%. There we go. Okay, so it's pretty responsive. The image gets smaller and starts getting pinned to the upper right-hand corner as the text starts falling. I guess we could add some sort of media queries so that once it gets here, maybe the picture goes centered. So let's do that. I think I just want to say, did I forget how to do media queries? I probably did. Let's see. Let me take a look at our handy dandy curriculum, unless anyone remembers them off the top of their head. Nope, I'm right. It's just max width. Okay, let me inspect this here. So at 520. So at 520 pixels, what I wanted to do is I want a character image for the width to go from 40% to maybe, no, let's say 60%. See what happens if I do that. Okay, we do see it get bigger. Great. And then instead of float right, I just wanted to say float none. Okay. And since it's not floating, what I can do to center everything is I can also access a character, the division, and I can give it a display of flex, and then flex direction the column. Then I can align items center. Okay, so now we have our little ID card. As the image gets smaller, It eventually, once it gets to the place where it can't be managed, which is at 520 pixels, turns it into a badge. All right. So there's some good CSS with some media queries and some floatings. So that's good. And now our single character page has been updated. Let me share the CSS with everyone really quick. Okay, does anyone have any questions over the ACharacter page?
Could we see the ACharacter page one more time?
Of course.
And could you scroll up just a little bit? Just a little more.
Any questions about any of the CSS, any of the functionality?
Just to double check, the width and height percentages are based off of the parent element, correct?
Yes. Every
Okay.
time you're giving a percent, it's always going to reference the parent.
Thank you.
With the ternary statement, are we just checking that the character is not null like for the first time that the page renders?
Right. So I'm waiting for this response to come back and give a character into a value. So currently right now it's null, which is why, or it is null, which is why it waits until there's a spinner. So I could go back to characters. And then if I choose Jerry Smith, we see the spinner. Once the response comes back, that's when we get Jerry Smith.
Perfect.
What was this error for? Why are you crying? Okay. All right. Okay, perfect. So now we have this portion done. The next portion that we're going to be working through is being able to select our favorite characters, right? And then we have to make a favorites page. How much time do we have? We're still pretty good on time. You can go ahead and start it. All right, so let's go over to our pages and let's create this page here. I'm going to zoom back in a bit. I'm going to collapse this so I can get some working space. And now I'm just going to go ahead and touch favorites page.jsx. And then I'm going to code favorites page.jsx. Okay, so now here I'm going to go ahead and construct my component. So I'm going to name it favorites page. This component will be a JSX component that returns JSX. So I'm going to return a fragmented statement here for now. And this fragmented statement will have something like an H2 element that says favorites. Okay. And then I'm going to export default favorites page. All right. I know that eventually I'm going to have an array of favorites and all this other stuff. But then the question is, well, how do I even get the information here? Right? I know I need to connect this to my router. So let's go and connect it to my router. Create a new path here. Oh, hold on, probably need that. There it is. Let's create an element for my favorites page. Okay, so now I add a path favorites for where the element favorites page will be rendered. We can see it being imported here. And favorites page was created Well, now I just need to add it to my navigation. So I'm going to go into header. And I'm going to copy this nav link here. It should be going to favorites. Okay. Great. So just a real quick recap of what we just did here. Let me close down anything we don't need. I created a favorites page component that's going to return an H2 element within a fragmented tag. Okay. And it's being exported through a default value. I need to connect this to my router because this is going to be a child of app. So I need to go over to router. I create a new object where the path of favorites is being added and attach the element of favorites pages or of favorites page, I apologize. So that when I go to the favorites page or when I go to my localhost 5173/favorites, it renders my favorites page. Then I needed a way to navigate there. So I added a link to favorites with the name of favorites. So now when I go here, I can see the link. I click on favorites. This is what it shows me. It shows me nothing. There's nothing there. There is no favorites. All right. So now I need to be able to actually add favorites into here. And this favorites needs to be accessible from pretty much everywhere. All right, it needs to be accessible pretty much throughout my entire app. So if it needs to be accessible throughout my entire app, wherever it is that I'm holding my favorites, it should be somewhere that I can access all of the children. Well, that tells me that this use state needs to live within app. So I'm going to go ahead and make a favorites and set favorites within my app. And I'm going to initialize that as an empty array. Now I just said this needs to be accessible to all of the children. So if it needs to be accessible to all of the children are connected to app through outlet. So I know that outlet gives me context to be able to pass both favorites and set favorites. And let me make sure that's the right amount of brackets, because I know that's where I always make a mistake, is in how many brackets go into context. Okay, yep, only 2 brackets. All right, so I pass in my 2 brackets and I pass in favorites and set favorites into my outlet context. Well, now let's work on adding something into favorites before we even worry about displaying something into favorites. Well, let's see. Once I go to my details page, maybe I want to add a button to add that individual into my favorites. Or maybe I want to do that from my all characters. Who knows, right? We'll count down the functionality. Where should we start it? I guess we should start the functionality of it within the character card, right? Since I think once I go into my favorites page, I would want to render a character card for every single one of my favorites. So let's see. I'm going to go into the first place where all of my characters get rendered. So that's my characters page. And in here, I know that I'm going to need to access both favorites and set favorites. So I'm going to grab those from useOutletContext. So I'm going to grab favorites and set favorites. And both of those are coming from useOutletContext. So now I have that information. I have access to both the getter and the setter of my empty array. But I need to be able to access those within my card. So now I need to pass them as props. So I'm just going to give them the same name I'm going to say that favorites will be favorites, and that set favorites will be set favorites. That way my card has access to this information. Okay. So I decided that I want to create a favorites array at my app level so that it's accessible throughout my entire app. But I need to pass it down to my character page so that it can be accessible through the card. So I gave it into the context, both the getter and the setter of favorites. So here I pass in the getter, and here I pass in the setter as a context for outlet. Within my character page, I grabbed both the getters and setters from useOutletContext. And then I passed favorites into my character card as a prop. Does anyone have any questions about how I'm passing that information down? And actually, maybe we can take a look at what we drew down yesterday. There you go. Okay, so I made favorites at the app level. I need it to be accessible from my card, and currently my card is attached to all characters, right? So I needed to provide favorites into outlet through context so that favorites can then move into the all cars through useOutletContext, and then I can pass it down as a prop to the card. Does anyone have any questions about how that data flow is happening? Okay, it doesn't seem like there are any questions. So I'm going to go ahead and keep moving forward at this point. So now I finally have my favorites being accessible to the card. But my card, is this drawing posted somewhere? It is not currently posted, but after this, I can definitely download it and post it. Of course. Okay, so now I can look at my card component. And now within my card component, I can grab both favorites and set favorites. So favorites is coming, and set favorites is also coming in as a prop. So now I can add a new button. And this button, I'm going to make it a warning. That way it's yellow. And my onClick function should either add it onto my favorites or remove it from my favorites if it's currently within favorites. So there's a little bit of logic that I'm going to run here. Ooh, how are we looking on time? Okay, we're still good on time. So here's what we'll do, right? We're going to create a useState value. And this will determine if it's in favorites or not. So let's call it is favorite. And then set is favorite. So that we can trigger a render every single time. And I'm going to make it default to false. So now I'm going to make two functions. One that will remove an object or one of these from favorites, and one that will add something to favorites. So let's make const remove favorite. And this one should be rather simple. This one should just do something like takes in, maybe it takes in the ID. Actually, it doesn't even need that. I can iterate through my favorites. So I can say, well, this should only show if it is or it isn't. I check that. Let's do this. So to remove from favorites, what I'm going to do is I'm going to set favorites. And this set favorites is going to be set to favorites.filter. This filter function is going to take in a favorite. And what it's going to do is it's going to return every favorite where the favorite.id and does not match the ID that's being passed in as a parameter. And then it could also set its favorite to false. So now const add to favorites. This should only happen if I don't already have this individual in, but I won't worry about that here. Currently, I'll just do set favorites. I'm going to utilize the spread operator for the current favorites array. And then I'm going to add the ID, name, and image. And then I'll set is favorite to true. Okay, so that returns, that gives me two functions. I'll be able to add onto my favorites, and I'll be able to remove from my favorites. But now how do I determine if something is within my favorites or not? So now I can say const in favorites. This is also going to be a function, and it will return favorites.filter, where favorites is .id is equal to the ID. Maybe we want to return this as a number. No, I guess an empty array will do. Okay. So now I made these three functions. This will return an array of either one or more zero or more objects. This will add to my current favorites, and this will remove from my current favorites. So now I need to create a use effect that will run this in favorites portion as soon as the card renders. So now I can say if in favorites I want to set is favorite to true. Else, I want to set is favorite to false. And I want this to happen every time the card renders. All right, so the card will render. And the first thing it's going to do is it's going to run this use effect. Well, after everything renders, it's going to run this use effect. And it's going to ask, hey, is this inside of favorites? And that will either return an array with one object inside of it, or an array with no objects inside of it, making it a truly or falsy statement. If it's empty, this will be falsy. And if it has an object within it, it will be truly. So it'll come back as either true or false. If it is, then it's going to set is favorite to true. If it is not, it will set is favorite to false, allowing me to do the following. So now I can say is favorite as a question mark. And if it is favorite, then what it will do is it will render remove from favorites. If it is not, it will render add to favorites. So let's take a look at my all characters. It seems like I did some sort of functionality wrong because currently it's giving me remove, meaning that it's being set to true. Let me console.log this statement here. Okay, so it is coming back false again. So if in favorites, I should come back as false. It should be set to false. What syntax error am I making here?
Is it in your ternary statement?
I don't know. Well, is favorite, if this is true, it should say remove. So for some reason, this is being set to true, even though it's coming back as false. There you go. Okay, so it looks like a list came back as truthy, regardless whether it's empty or not. So I just made it into dot length so I could get a 0 or a 1. Okay, so now everything is working. I'm able to see each individual character. All of them say add. And then we'll go over, let's go into applying this add or remove function now. So now I can say onClick. And this onClick will either add or remove something. So I'm going to say if is favorite. So if it is true, it should run the remove favorite function. And if it is not favorite, then it should run the add to favorites function. Okay, so it is not a favorite. I click on that. That shows me that it's been added, or at least it's supposed to show me that it's been added. I have a couple of too many console.log statements, so maybe I need to remove those here. Let me do a little bit of cleanup when it comes to console.logs, specifically this one. Okay, so now I'm seeing all of them, but I want to see if this add or remove function is actually working. So now in order to see if that add or remove function is actually working, it sounds like I want to log something into the console every time the state of my array of favorites changes. So that tells me that what I want to use is a useEffect hook. So I'm going to go into my app.jsx, create a useEffect hook that will log on to the console the value of favorites every time the state of favorites changes. So now I can see it's originally an empty list or an empty array. I can add multiple individuals into said list. And I can open it up and see their objects. If I remove someone from said list, we can see that that's also removing the correct values. All right, so that was a lot. So let's do a quick recap over what we just did. And then over the 10-minute break, I'll also answer any questions that anyone may have. So starting off with our useState function. First, we created a favorites and a set favorites function that will hold in an array of favorites. We wanted to make this accessible to all of the children, so we passed it down through the context within the outlet. All right, that brings us back to TL draw over here. We pass it down to the context within the outlet. So that then takes us to my characters page. Within characters page, I grabbed favorites and set favorites from the outlet. So I bring it down and I go to my all characters page. Great. So now that I have that information, I then passed it down to each individual character card as a prop. So then I came over here, I grabbed this, and I gave it to the character card as a prop so that it can alter my favorites. Okay. Well, now I went into my character card, and in my character card, I had to run a little bit of logic. The easy parts were adding to the favorites because we've done this before, right? We can change the state of something by utilizing the spread operator and then adding an object of the keys that we need. We know we're going to need the ID, the name, and the image. And then the filter function, well, we know we can also do that because it returns an array of all the objects that meet this condition. So for every object that didn't have the same ID as the ID provided for the card would then get removed, right? So this was all nice and easy. Then we wanted to find out if this one card is actually in the favorites. So what we do is we just return an array that will either be empty or have an object within it. Now an array, empty or not, was still turning out to be truly. That was something unexpected on my part when it comes to JavaScript, since in Python, any empty data structure will be falsy. But in JavaScript, that doesn't seem to be the case. It seems an empty object is truly, and an empty array is also truly. So when I run this use effect, because I want to determine whether this individual character is in my favorites or not every time the card renders, I ask, hey, what is the length of the array being returned by in favorites? So again, this will either return an empty array or an array with one object. So it returns that the length is either 0 or 1. 0 is falsy, so it sets it to false, and 1 is truly, which would set it to true. That then allows me to use some ternary statements. For example, I ask, hey, is this a favorite? If it is within the favorites, which is what we determined here, it will give us the option to remove. And if it's not within the favorites, it will give us the option to add. At least that's what it's displaying. And then we can see how we use the same logic within our ternary statements to determine the onClick function that will be triggered. If it is a favorite, we can remove it from the favorite upon clicking. And if it is not a favorite, we can add it to favorites upon clicking. All right. It is currently 11:03. So let's, oh, sorry, it is currently 12:03. So let's go ahead and take a 10-minute break. And then during that 10-minute break, if anyone has any questions, I can address them. Thank you so much, everyone. Questions?
I have a bug somewhere in mine.
Okay. What does the bug say?
Well, my screen isn't displaying anything.
Okay.
Should I share my screen?
Yeah, of course. Let me go ahead and pause the recording here. Awesome. All right, welcome back, everyone. It's currently 12:15. Let's go ahead and continue with this project so that we can finish it off before lunchtime. So far what we've gone over is how to add individual characters through the character card. But now I need to actually display those characters through the character page. Well, the character page is connected through app.jsx because my favorites page is a child of app.jsx. So that tells me that any context provided through the children by outlet is accessible from the favorites page. So I can grab favorites and set favorites from useOutletContext again. So I'm going to grab favorites and set favorites from useOutletContext. And then I'm just going to simply show my favorites. So I'm going to map out my favorites by utilizing a mapping function. And then I want to show a character card for each one of those favorites. Well, I know that they're going to need a key. That could be a favorite.id. I know it's going to need an ID. And I know it's going to need these things because if I take a look at my character card, it has it all within props. So I can just grab these props and bring them over so that I can visually see them whenever I'm creating my component. So I know it's going to need the ID, so I can pass in the favorite ID. I know it's going to need the name, which is favorite.name. I know it's going to need the image, which is favorite.image. And then finally, it's going to need favorites. And it's going to need set favorites. And instead of mapping with curly braces, I want to map with open parentheses. Okay. So now all my information was oh no, it hasn't been reset. Good. So now if I go to my favorites, I should be able to see both Rick Sanchez and Morty Smith because they're in my favorites. I can remove them. I can go to my characters. I can add someone, go back to favorites, and I can see that both of them are still present, and the details page still works. All the functionality is still there for me to be able to have favorites. The only thing that I noticed that I messed, well, not the only thing, I know I messed up quite a bit throughout this demonstration, but the one requirement that I noticed I missed is that I can only have 4 favorites as well. I can't just add as many favorites as I want. I could only have 4. So that could be handled by making a simple if statement. So I can say if favorites.length is less than 4, and I can do the following. All right, so currently I have 2. I can go back to characters. Here's 3. Here's 4. And now if I click on Jerry Smith, nothing's going to happen because this set favorite back to true is not being triggered. And if I go back to my favorites, we can see that Jerry Smith never gets added into my favorites. Now, as soon as I remove someone, so now I removed Morty. If I go back into the characters, I can add the princess. And now we can see that the princess has been added. And there is all the requirements for this assignment. Does anyone have any questions over anything that we covered throughout this Rick and Morty exercise?
Can I see your favorites page real quick?
Of course.
Getting an error that use outlet context is not a function, or its return value is not iterable on my favorites page.
One, was it imported? Did you call the function and then did you destructure with curly brackets and not square brackets?
I think that's it. Yeah.
Awesome. Did that do the trick?
Yes, it did. Thank you.
Fantastic. Any other questions, bugs, anything?
I'm having trouble, like, after I click add favorite from the character card, it's saying set favorites is not a function.
After you're in the character card, it's saying, is that happening from your favorites page or your all characters page?
My character, on my all characters page.
Okay, so if I go to the characters page, one, did you import everything from useOutletContext like this on line 9?
Yes.
Okay, and then did it get passed down as a prop here?
Yep.
All right.
Oh. I think I fixed it. Thank you.
Of course. We found it.
I have an issue, but it might be a little more complicated.
Okay. Awesome. It's all right. It seems like the majority of the class is pretty much done with the content. So thank you so much, everyone. I hope this was productive for you. We can see that now at the end of this review, we created a responsive site that we can go to Rick and Morty, see a small text that would get us motivated to watch Rick and Morty. We can go to About, and we can see a small text that should be describing the Rick and Morty show. Obviously, right now, it just has Lorem Ipsum for time. We can go into characters, see all 400 characters. If I want to refresh, it would get rid of all of my data. So currently right now I have no favorites. If I click on favorites, nothing would show up. But if I were to add favorites, I can see that I can't have more than 4. All right, I can't add Jerry Smith. If I go to favorites, I currently have my 4. If I remove Morty and I go back to characters, I can add the princess. And now I can see that I'm back to 4 characters. And that is the Rick and Morty exercise up to this point. All right, thank you so much, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording, and then I'll answer any questions that anyone may have.